All right, welcome everyone, the day after party night to VMworld. Thanks for making it. Appreciate you guys coming. We have a good session today. We've got four great honored guests to my left here. We're going to talk a lot about vSAN. I want to encourage questions. We've got the microphones on each side. We want the questions to be recorded for the recorded session, so please get up. Or if you're too lazy, I do have a microphone. I can come down and come your way. So just raise your hand and I'll shoot over there. Couple of things up front, disclaimers. We probably won't talk too much about forward-looking statements or roadmap items, but a few things may come up, so all those disclaimers, don't tweet and get us in trouble. A little bit about the agenda. We've got our panelists, so each of them are going to introduce themselves. Then they're going to go through again and introduce what they're doing at their company and how they're using vSAN in their environment at their company. And then we'll get into some Q&A. So I have some questions that I can ask them, but much better if it's you guys asking the questions. So hopefully you brought a few for us. A little bit about myself. My name is Peter Kelty. I have kind of two roles at VMware. I work covering the East Coast. I was one of the first vSAN SEs that was brought in to help get vSAN off the ground. Started at 0 customers and up to the nearly 10,000 customers that we have today. So it's been kind of fun to see that evolution, and I did this last year, had 4 other great customers here last year, so it's good to keep growing and have good feedback from these guys. I also work in the office as CTO for storage, and I bring customer information back to our product teams so that we can help develop the product, new features and changes to the product to make it even better. So, all right, so enough about me. Let's move on to these guys. I'll let Joachim start off and introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joachim Heppner. I work for Sanofi Pharmaceuticals. I head up the server virtualization engineering team. We're responsible for server and workstation virtualization technologies.
My name is Mike DiBenedetto. I'm the director of global IT for Sekisui Diagnostics. We're a life sciences company, and I oversee infrastructure applications and end user services.
My name is Alex Suez. I work for Travelers Insurance. I manage the virtual infrastructure at the company.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jaime Garola. I work for Herbalife International, and I manage the virtualization infrastructure.
Great. Thanks, gentlemen. All right, so now we want to get into a little bit about what's going on in their environments. So in around mid-2014, Joachim kicked off a POC on vSAN. That was our first release of vSAN, our 5.5 version. It had some rough things, mostly around hardware and compatibility. So we kind of, dropped that. We kicked it back off again in 2016. So what happened then?
Yeah, so we did a POC in 2016, and we looked at a variety of vendors. We looked at some of the different hyperconverged players out there, did some evaluations with vSAN, and based on what we were seeing in vSAN as far as performance, usability, and functionality, vSAN was the selection that we went with.
Right. And a little bit just about Sanofi and what's going on there.
Yeah, so Sanofi is a global pharmaceutical company. We're in 110 countries around the world. We've got about 120,000 employees. We've got manufacturing in 87 different countries around the world. So it's a global company, so we've got a lot of different things to deal with, different types of data centers, small, medium, large, enterprise. We're in the pharma space, the vaccine business, and the consumer health business.
Okay. And then a little bit more about the environment. So we start off with Robo.
Yeah, we started off with Robo. So we did the pilots in 2014, and then in 2015 we kicked off a Robo project looking at all the different technologies. Then in early 2016 we ended up selecting vSAN to be deployed. Again, the good thing about vSAN was we were able to select different hardware vendors. So we weren't locked into any particular hardware vendor. And then as we started looking at vSAN a lot more, we also looked at some of the other use cases. We had a VDI environment that was kind of the traditional blade with some centralized storage that was starting to get a bit old. So we were looking at that, and we actually went ahead and moved forward and selected to use vSAN with ready nodes to replace our aging VDI environment. We've also now deployed vSAN for management clusters. So one of the things we always had in our environment was we had all of our VMware infrastructure running on the same infrastructure as everything else, which we always knew was an issue. We didn't want to buy a traditional SAN environment for that, and once vSAN came along, we had a viable option alternative. So we went ahead and bought all flash nodes for that. So we have all our management environments in the different enterprise data centers running on that. And then recently we started some other projects to look at the existing legacy environments to centralize storage and said, let's start moving forward and taking a cue from what the big data guys have done and using converged storage and CPU. We're going to start moving forward and replacing some of our legacy environments with vSAN platforms, and also then looking at Cloud Foundation as another option as we go down that road to get further integration on the network side.
Excellent. Thanks, Jacob. All right, now Michael, I think we first met at a VMUG in around 2014. I think you said after we talked, he said I might want to do this. So talk about kind of how you get into a little bit about Sekisui and then what's going on there and how you're using vSAN.
Sure. So Sekisui Diagnostics, we're about 500 employees spread across 4 different countries, and we've got some geographic separation that we contend with, but we try to centralize and consolidate into a couple data centers in the United States. So we started looking at vSAN in very early 2014, before it was GA. There wasn't a lot of players in the hyperconverged space at that time, but our need was to add a secondary site. And so at the time, we didn't want to go down the path of investing in traditional SAN fiber channel. So we looked into vSAN. We were an early adopter, so we had some of those challenges with the 5.5 version, but we ran that version for some time and ran test dev. It was an SRM target from our primary facility. Ran corporate infrastructure services primarily. And then we moved ahead in 2016 with an upgrade. So based on guidance from the account team and lessons learned, we essentially addressed the hardware inside of the existing cluster. So we moved from single disk groups in our hosts to multiple disk groups per node. We changed over the flash devices based on HCL guidance, and we upgraded to the version 6 release, and that provided a lot more stability, a lot better performance in our environment. And now actively, as we're kind of circling back and seeing that better performance, we're considering it for our production environment. We actually purchased hardware. We're always purchasing hardware based on budget cycles, and this never quite lines up, but we purchased hardware in advance and planned accordingly. So now, as we get down the road, we're actually just adding drives into our existing hosts inside of our production data center. So those NVMe drives just shipped, so we're really excited about that. We'll get those plugged in, and we'll start using it in our production facility.
Great. Thank you, Michael. So Alex, you guys are just kind of starting to get into vSAN, but yeah, let's talk a little bit about Travelers and not just the golf tournament that you host, and I like to go watch, but yeah.
Yeah, so as you guys may know, we're a pretty large insurance company. We've got a couple data centers throughout the U.S. We've got an office in the U.K., and then we've got smaller field office sites across the country. There's 120 of them where we do claims and quoting and that type of stuff. So we're a really big organization. We've got 1,200 ESX hosts, so we're pretty conservative with what we do when we look at our technologies. And a couple of years ago, we were doing a project where we were looking to start doing hyperconverged. We were looking at a bunch of different vendors, and this was about the 6.0 vSAN timeframe. And so we qualified a couple different HCI products. And at that time, because we're conservative insurance company, we kind of disqualified vSAN at that time, and we went with a different platform. But now that it's gone, well, we started looking at it again at 6.2, and with the dedupe compression features and erasure coding and all that stuff, that was a lot more attractive to us. So we started doing some work moving towards vSAN that way. So we've stood up 2 clusters of vSAN at the time. We've got one for Hadoop in a dev environment where the guys kind of kick around the test stuff that they do, and then we've got another production Hadoop cluster that we're running. And the dev cluster is 4 hosts, the production cluster is 8 hosts, and everything there is working great. What we're doing currently is we're qualifying new hardware platforms, and we're looking to move to vSAN on those as well. So we're looking at Dell Ready nodes with vSAN. We've got a POC underway for that. We've got like 2 clusters. We're working with that, doing performance testing. And we're also looking at doing SDDC Cloud Foundation stuff. So we're looking at doing the 2 management zones for vSAN, one kind of a management cluster, and then the data zone where we will put our workloads. And going forward, we're probably going to be looking to get off of traditional SAN arrays, moving to vSAN that way. So,
right, excellent. Thank you, Alex. All right, Hyman, Herbalife. You guys were on stage yesterday with Chris Wolf, our CTO, Office CTO for the field. Let's talk about Herbalife.
So, right, I'm Gorola with Herbalife. We have, I believe 8 data centers around the world. We have presence in 85 countries around the world. We are heavy on the vSphere. We are about 95% virtualized and 5% physical. Right now, the only thing that really is physical is just like the hard-hitting ERP databases. Other than that, it's mostly all virtual. So we started deploying vSAN last year. We went through some semi-intensive testing of the vSAN in the beginning because we were skeptical, and our company is very risk avert. So anything we can do to minimize risk, we could. The vSAN did outstanding, both in resilience of the vSAN as well as in respect of speed. We did we measured the current workload on some of our environments. We got a typical readout of 70/30. We mimicked that same workload onto our POC, and we did outstanding. I don't think we passed. I think it was like 3 milliseconds with 11% CPU overhead. So, and I think on the original POC, I believe we did something like 86,000 IOPS. So it consisted of 4 nodes, all flash, and then we did also hybrid. So it was really good. It was a really good experience. We took that information, we created a PowerPoint presentation to our management, got halfway through that PowerPoint presentation, and they said, go to production. They had seen enough because we were able to converge. We had an initiative to consolidate our data centers. We were moving our data centers from, for example, Los Angeles to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and from Colorado Springs to Salt Lake City. So we had the opportunity to look at new technology and try to greenfield it and try to architect it for the best ability that we could, giving us the ability to maintain agile and have elasticity. So that went well. And then from that point forward, we started looking at vSAN for other workloads. And slowly we've migrated quite a bit of workloads from, for example, we moved VDI to vSAN, and we moved our telecom to vSAN. And we're slowly adding more and more additional resources considering the great performance that we're getting out of vSAN.
Perfect. Part of that PowerPoint presentation to your executives was financial TCO analysis and things like that. So you did some pretty significant work there. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. So what you're seeing right now, this is the slide. I think it was like slide 5 in the PowerPoint presentation that we showed our management. And excuse me. And so the intent was to collapse data centers. Right. So when you have a data center, you have back office infrastructure that you have to have. In our Los Angeles data center, we happen to have some of our executives' BlackBerry servers. So that's not going to go away. So we had to keep some back office infrastructure, but we wanted to get rid of all of the arrays, the SAN switches. In other words, pull out all the fiber channel infrastructure. We also had some HP. By the way, we're an HP shop, but we had a C7000 with blades. We didn't have a use for it because we were trying to pull out the fiber channel and the disk and the array. So we needed to find a solution. We found vSAN. With our VAR, we were able to come up with a configuration that met the HCL. And we were able to present this particular slide that you're seeing to our executive management. It was the 5th slide in the 10-slide PowerPoint. And at that point, they just ended it and said, go to production. So it was good. It was a very rewarding time for that. So,
great. All right, well, thank you. So we've had a chance to introduce things. Again, feel free. Questions on the mics here. Or, I can start asking questions. So you guys tell me. All right, we'll get into my questions. All right, so Jaime, you talked about a proof of concept. I think everybody else did proof of concepts to some degree. Talk a little bit about some of the criteria that you had to complete and justify vSAN, maybe. So, Jakob, maybe start us off.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things we were really looking at was usability and cost. That was our biggest drivers for looking at vSAN because, as an example, in the VDI environment, when we originally did that 4 or 5 years ago, it was about $500,000 per region to get that VDI environment up and running. So that entry point to get the VDI going was pretty high. So now we've looked at the vSAN environment, and based on the starting, now we're just starting with it, we're starting at about 80,000 to get vSAN up and running for VDI with a small VDI footprint, but the intent is to just slowly add building blocks, or we'll call them Lego blocks, onto that, and then buy as we need instead of buying that big capacity up front. The other thing is always usability. I mean, how easy is it to use? And we've learned from using what we'll call legacy storage environments and then blade environments and all that. It's always very complicated to troubleshoot, to manage, and then just to provision. And from our point of view as being the virtualization team, we were really looking at making our life a lot easier and just saying, look, we just go to one person now, one team, one support model, and it just gets everything moving a lot faster.
Excellent. Thank you. Michael.
So,
well, let me say, preference or maybe is you have a pretty stringent documentation process to get things implemented, right? So some of the benefits of being able to start from scratch and do things kind of by spec and by code. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So for us, the proof of concept, again, we knew we needed to expand, and so we had a chance to look at comparative to your traditional architecture, right? So one of the things about virtual SAN was very attractive was basically for us to consider, okay, we're gonna have to have the compute nodes in the environment regardless. So for us, we felt confident in progressing basically with the storage aspects because we knew that the compute nodes are going to be there regardless. So for us, we went through the process of documenting as close to our current environment on that compute side as possible. That made things easier for us. And then basically just isolating the storage change. We had to document that essentially installation process and operating processes were similar, if not identical, to what we had in our production environment. So when we did our initial builds, again, at that time, we purchased equipment before there was an HCL. So that was a little bit interesting, a little bit tricky, but got some guidance from the product team, put some equipment into an environment, and then started to run some tests. And then based off that test data, again, got further guidance and then moved that forward into production. For us, the space savings is a very tangible benefit because, again, if we had to go the traditional storage route, we have small footprint as it is, but that footprint would have had to have grown, and we've been able to avoid operational costs from growing out that architecture because we're able to consolidate it into basically just 8U for that one cluster. So it's been very beneficial that way.
Cool. Thanks. And Alex, so you're running Hadoop in production and test and dev, but the rest of your environment is really a proof of concept environment, right?
Yeah, so I think cost is at the top of most people's lists for this stuff, right? And you want to do more with less, and vSAN lets you do that. I mean, it lets you consolidate the number of physical things in your data center that you have to manage. It lets you get rid of the fiber channel stuff that you have to manage. It lets you consolidate teams to some degree. You can break down those silos that a lot of companies have. Traditionally, there's like a SAN team, network team, the virtual team, and it's letting us kind of take those silo groups, break them down, and we're kind of going to be cross-functional now where the smaller teams can handle more with less touching. Automation is another huge thing that we're looking for, being able to automate the deployment of these things, the management of these things. That's a really big key for us. So yeah, we're really looking forward to all the stuff that it has to offer.
Right. So you mentioned how your consolidation of your management resources and kind of bringing everybody together, software-defined data center means all the software-defined teams, whether it's networking or compute storage, all kind of have to work together.
Absolutely.
So, Hyman, how's that worked in your world?
It's been actually great. So we had an actual SI to tried to collapse or try to shrink as much as we could the data center, in particularly in Los Angeles, because that's where our adventure in vSAN started, is trying to consolidate that data center. So we wanted to pull out the fiber channel, the same thing as a lot of people, right? And so we wanted to shrink it also, the data center. So one of the benefits that we had out of that was that we didn't have to have such high commitment in power. We saved in cooling, in real estate. So that was the cherry on top, you know. But being able to get rid of the storage array, getting rid of the SAN switches and enclosures, especially because they're starting to get old, right? So support starts going up on those, right? So by going to the vSAN, we're able to avoid all of those.
Malcolm, how about you guys? Are you the one-man show, or you had to bring everybody together?
Yeah, no. So you know, as any large corporations, we've got the storage team, we've got a network team, we've got a server team, we've got all sorts of teams, and you know, documentation and all the fun stuff. So from that point of view, it was always a bit of a challenge getting anything deployed in a quick manner. And we're looking at vSAN, especially in our remote offices now. We can simplify things when we're deploying vSAN environments. Everything, for the most part, in our remotes are 2-node environments. Some of the larger ones are 3-node and up. We've got regional data centers. And then the other thing that's been going on is just, you know, a reduction in the amount of people we have now, right? So we don't have all those people spread around the world anymore, so it's a lot more centralized. So with that, it's a lot easier now if we have this vSAN product, deploy everything on there and then expand it as we need it. So it certainly does help. And in a lot of those environments, since we are starting over, it also makes a lot of sense. We don't have to deal with a lot of the legacy topics.
Right. And then Michael.
So we're a smaller organization, so from a team perspective, it really helps us that we don't have to train for that extra expertise on the storage side. For us, it's very sort of traditional virtual infrastructure management, and we already had that in our team, but it's helpful that we can really look at our organization in the IT space and make sure that we're not trying to over-allocate people with tasks that spread them too thin. So certainly helps us from the personnel side.
Excellent. All right. Question over here. We get it turned on here. Testing.
Hello, testing.
We got you now.
I am Kishore. I work for Dell EMC. I manage SDS portfolio at Dell EMC. I have a question for all of you. You know, vSAN, you can buy your own hardware and bring vSAN software and implement your own implementation, versus you do vSAN ready nodes. So my two questions. One is, did you consider bring your own hardware and vSAN software versus ready node? And second, if you did do vSAN ready nodes, what's the value you saw in vSAN ready nodes?
Who wants to go first?
I can start. So we did evaluate everything. We evaluated Nutanix. We evaluated VxRail. At the end, we ended up just building our own. We ended up using the DL380s, and we made sure that all the hardware was on the HCL. The reason why we chose that in the beginning was because we were very skeptical of vSAN in the beginning. So we didn't want to take on a financial commitment to having a ready node and then being tied into vSAN, right? So we chose the hardware that we chose because we wanted that extra PCI slot, so that if for some reason vSAN didn't work out for us, we would have that PCI port to put in fiber channel. It would be unfortunate because it would defeat the objective that we had, which was to collapse and remove fiber channel. But it was new, right? It was new for us, and as I have always said, we are very, very risk avert, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't exposing ourselves too much. After that, and we did new configurations. We did remove the fiber channel because we got past that fear, right? But it worked out well. Nowadays, we have more just nodes that we can put in one volume group, and that's enough for us. So, but I can tell you from the other manufacturers, we did find some limitations that that Herbalife didn't feel comfortable taking. You know, there were some hardware limitations that were not good enough for us.
So, yeah, I mean, we actually did the opposite approach. So we worked with Peter back in 2014 with the initial betas of vSAN, and you know, I think we could all admit it was pretty challenging getting it working, getting the right parts from HP or Dell or whoever you were looking to work with. And then we did go through in 2015 and continue to look at that. Once the vendors bought into this ready node concept, we've pretty much settled on that. So we've got now in our internal catalogs just HY4, 6s, and 8s in there. And then we did do some modifications. We did add a 4-socket server in there because we thought that from a compute point of view, we seem to be more memory bound than disk bound. So we wanted to have a 4-socket server in there for people to choose from. So we've added that. And then we've also added the flash nodes. But again, we wanted to take out the part, you know, we wanted to rely a little bit more on the vendors on the testing side because we said, you know, we don't have that much time and resources, and the way the technology changes so rapidly, it just didn't make sense for us to spend too much time on that. We said, look, VMware's already tested this, Dell HP has tested it, so I think we can pretty much say that we're okay with this.
And to Jakob's point, the same thing with us. I mean, we chose ready nodes because the pre-configuration, we didn't want to spend the time having to go through the HCL and find each component, make sure it was qualified and do all that. We wanted to rely on our partners to help us get that configuration out and speed to market the hardware.
And just one more thing to add. So for our size and scale, we go the build it ourselves route basically because we're not refreshing or adding at the same pace. And so for us, our storage cycle and compute cycles don't necessarily line up. So for instance, we're going to do all flash in our production environment. We bought the compute last year, but we're buying the storage this year. So we bought last year, but we looked at the HCL, made sure we had the right controllers in that box. We had an NVMe build, even though we don't have NVMe drives in there now. But again, fast forward, and here we are, we'll be able to basically simply, we're just buying drives from the vendor and popping them in. So there's a flexibility there based on our scope and size. It is extra, certainly extra man hours, extra work. I think if we had the opportunity, we'd like to have the ready node option.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. Thanks.
Hello. Test. Hi, my name is Matt Lehman. I work at St. Joseph's University. It's a small college on the Philadelphia area on the East Coast. It's a generic question for the four of you as well. Just curious about how you decide kind of how to break up your clusters within vSAN. Is it more of a a tiering thing for business units, or is it for for other varying reasons? I'm just curious about what model you guys decide on and why.
Yeah, so each of you have multiple clusters. Yeah, why do you do that? Why not one big cluster? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll start. In our case, it was a specific use case that we started with. The customers came to us and said, hey, we want to test this out. And so we purpose-built them a cluster for their Hadoop test stuff. And then they said, this is great, we want to move forward. So then we built them another cluster, and they forgot to order all the hardware that they needed. So we actually had to grow the cluster once we did the initial deployment, which was actually a really easy and great process. But going forward, I think as we move into our big production clusters, we kind of have this concept of shared infrastructure. So we're going to be building out, I think, probably 16 node clusters and put a big shared workload on those, and then just stand up building blocks of that size and scale throughout the data center.
Yeah.
So, just so very quickly, in our environment, it's geographical based. So again, smaller size. So for us, it's geo based, and then we treat the clusters they're independent, but any workload could run on any cluster. So it's mixed workload, mixed use case.
Yeah, for us, it's we started out with use cases, right? VDI and management cluster. But now as we go more into this, we have the same concept. We have a general compute environment that we just put as many workloads on there as we can, and then we fill it up and go to the next one and build another new one. Probably 16 nodes also. The only other thing we have to consider that we have in our other environment is license. Thank you, Microsoft, Oracle, and IBM. We have to create license clusters, we call them. So we have to separate, the smallest amount of CPU footprint for that workload. So that's going to be something we have to figure out how to do that well. So because we don't want to go below 4 nodes for vSAN, but we see in our traditional environments that we can, a two node blade environment is fine. So we're going to just, that's going to be something we're going to have to look at.
Thank you.
For us, it's a moving target for us. We have the same experiences in respect of licensing. We have a shared cluster that anybody who has a smaller budget in their project, they go to the shared cluster. But if you happen to have a project or a strategic initiative and you require a dedicated resource, then we'll give them a cluster. The challenge is, though, as I stated earlier, is the licensing with Microsoft. So we try to target our clusters on application, right? Like we'll have an Oracle cluster, and then we'll have a web server cluster, but licensing, especially Microsoft, right? Where if you put one Windows, for us at least, you put one Windows machine in one cluster that has 95% Linux and one Windows, all of those ESX hosts have to be licensed.
It's not just
so. Yeah. So for us, it's a moving target. We have to balance it out, right? And so we're balancing between, do we categorize our clusters based on application, or do we categorize it based on operating system? But for the most part, we have dedicated clusters, and then we have a shared cluster. But we normally don't go beyond 10 nodes per cluster. We're very risk avert. So we're more risk avert than fiscally conservative. I'll put it that way. So we don't go beyond 10.
And a quick follow-up question that just came to mind. How about storage policies on vSAN? Do you guys use different storage policies for different tiers like dev, test, prod, et cetera, with the same idea as the licensing? Anybody consider that?
So I think one of the interesting things is if you get to a point where you're all vSAN, you don't really have, vSAN sort of abstracts. So I guess that's another thing in terms of cluster design is your clusters don't necessarily cross in terms of availability to use your storage resources, right? So you consume your vSAN storage from the cluster that it's configured in. So if you have multiple clusters in the same environment, it's pretty tricky to kind of do that. So from a storage policy perspective, if you have all vSAN kind of larger shared infrastructure, shared clusters, those policies tend to be more around availability, let's say.
Protection levels,
performance.
failures to tolerate.
Yeah. So we in our environment for that reason don't see much use of it.
Yeah. So for Michael's purpose, he's got in his test dev environment, he's got a 4-node cluster. So his policy selection is failures to tolerate equal to 1. That's really the only option he's got. If he were to add one more node, he could do RAID 5 potentially and change the policy accordingly. So maybe, yeah. So but now you're changing your production sites which have larger nodes. Maybe take more advantage of that.
What would be great in the future is if multiple clusters could sort of cross-connect and see storage in different pools, and then you could maybe have this idea of sort of more higher performance storage and kind of different vSAN clusters that you could consume from different places. So, little product enhancement request.
I got it.
Thank you, guys.
Anybody else on that one?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we've got the 2 clusters up right now, and we're doing an FTT of 1 on both of those clusters. But the idea for production when we're going forward, I think, is we're going to want 2 availability groups, 2 storage groups per host, and then an FTT of maybe 2, so that we can tolerate a bad disk going down in one box and another outage to happen in the cluster somewhere, so that we don't lose the whole thing if 2 pieces of something go bad in the cluster.
Okay. And for those who may not know what storage policy-based management is, it's a common framework for defining service levels on your clusters. And so vSAN takes advantage of that. You can define gold, silver, bronze, or pink, green, blue, or test dev and production, any kind of definition you want to make for a policy. And then vSAN will just deliver on that policy. So we don't have LUNs in vSAN. So you define the policy and you get the protection based on that. Anybody else want to comment on use of policy-based management?
Yeah, right now since our environments are still fairly small, we've just got the default settings set up. In production, we'll have the 2 storage groups also, but for right now, it's fairly small still. So just sticking with the defaults.
And then Alex, you guys are looking into automation,
Right.
so the storage policy-based management will play into that as well. So
Yeah, using VRA, VRO to push the VMs into storage policy while being built is going to be a big thing for us, so we don't have to manage all of it manually or whatnot.
yep.
No storage policies
Just
yet.
defaults, and everything's running great. Okay,
We're typically always underutilized.
cool, very well. All right, we have a question here.
Hello. We just completed, well, I said just completed. So in our HCI journey, we have an installation in the lab that we're trying to vet and thoroughly test, and then we're looking at deploying it at robo offices and then also, in dev. But the direction we were kind of taking was basically we want to simplify the environment, and even if the acquisition cost is a little more, so we sort of went down instead of the roll your own option. We're going down conceptually the appliance option and looking at VxRail. So something that was really important for us was getting away from a compute vendor. We have Cisco in our environment pointing at the hypervisor, and the hypervisor guys pointing at storage, because it's it happens a lot in our environment. I don't know exactly if it's something we're doing, but I think about the last several years, and that's been a very big turnoff for us. So that kind of pushed us down the VxRail option, where you kind of have one throat to choke. So I'm kind of interested to know, it sounds like all four of you went the roll your own option. I want to understand, no holds barred, why you didn't go VxRail specifically.
Yeah, so for us, we looked at VxRail, but we looked at it back in, I guess it was 2015, 2016. And at the time, it was only a 4-node option, right? You couldn't go below that. And a lot of our remote office sites, we've done a lot of consolidation over the years. So really, they're only running 5-6 VMs at a lot of these sites. So, to spend, $100,000 on a VxRail, we couldn't justify that. So we just went with the 2-node option for there. I know now, I think VxRail is a little different now. I think does go down maybe 2 nodes in that same
VxRail
footprint.
doesn't have a 2-node yet, but they're
or 3 nodes maybe.
they have single nodes, and you can build out as many as you want, right?
So, yeah. So I mean, if we go and do we always like to go back and look at things again. If we get the opportunity to look at VxRail again, we will. But for what we did initially, it just didn't fit in for us. It is something we also wanted to do, though.
So I might reference that it wasn't available for us again at the time. I think that reference consistently shows, again, the growth and maturity of the product over the few years that we've been using it. At the time when we looked at it, it was EvoRail. And so at that time, we didn't see the value. I think, like any investment, you need to see the full value from the vendor or from the delivery offer. So priced in was some other features or use cases that didn't apply to us. So great, I'm sure, for any company that would have used those use cases, but just didn't fit in our environment. And that's what we also found with other HCI vendors like Nutanix and SimpliVity. And since we didn't have a lot of the other use cases, we found that we would have been paying for services and features that we wouldn't have leveraged. So, again, for us, vSAN, the flexibility, when we grow, when we add, it can be a controller at a time, a disk at a time. It's just very, very flexible. And again, I think if it did line up for us, we would certainly look down the ReadySAN, probably the Ready Node route, preferable to the VxRail route.
In our case, we're still kind of small, so the Ready Nodes were the easiest thing for us to stand up at the time. Going forward, we're looking at Cloud Foundation for the automation pieces, like I mentioned earlier. We want to have kind of that single pane of glass to manage the environment. And for us, we're a big shop, so we have lots of infrastructure that we need to manage. So the automation is really something that we're looking for very, very hardly. We're looking for it to help us offset man hours and all that kind of thing.
So I'll start off with VxRail and Nutanix are great companies, right? So I don't want to take anything from that. When we evaluated it, we looked at it from risk, right? I mean, there was a new technology that we're introducing to Herbalife, so risk was always an issue for us. When I actually came and reviewed it here at Solution Exchange a couple years ago, One of the things that discouraged me from that was that they have internal fans, right? So if you have, for example, a Nutanix and you have 4 nodes in it, and you go and you place that in a robo, right? Typically, you're not going to have an IT guy there at the robo. So we wanted something that we can depend on and not take on that additional risk. So we started asking questions about, okay, well, tell me about your network interface cards. You know, they had 4, I think, and there's 4 nodes and they all share it, right? So that's a part that I was like, I don't know if I really want to share my bandwidth. I understand 10 gigs times 4 is a lot of bandwidth, but you have, in essence, 2 of them going east-west, the other 2 going north-south. So we started looking at the internal, right? The network interface cards, do they share an ASIC or are they dedicated ASICs, right? Because if the ASIC fails, then both ports go down, right? Versus if you have independent ASICs to each network interface, then you could afford a port failure to happen, and then the other port on the same NIC will continue to work. So we looked at that. And then we saw the fan. And so we asked them about the fan. Hypothetically speaking, if the fan were to fail, what would you have to do to replace that? Unfortunately, at that time, I don't know how it is now, you had to shut down all 4 nodes to replace that fan. So at that point, it's too risky for us. We couldn't afford that.
Yeah, and the version you're talking about is probably about a year ago. The only offering from the VxRail perspective was the 2U 4-node appliance. They've since expanded the portfolio to where they have multiple options. You can buy a single node and as many single nodes as you need to build out your clusters. Different sizes, different disk types, and so there's more flexibility now. But in your decision process, that was all there was for VxRail, so you had to make the choice that you made, right?
And Nutanix fell into the same risk.
And I think the vendors benefit, to some degree. I mean, I remember what we had to do to stand the 5.5 cluster up. It's a lot simpler to stand up the clusters now than it was back then. So at the time, we were comparing the Evo Rail experience to our experience with Rolly Roan on 5.5. It was, night and day. And so there certainly was, we would have paid an amount for that benefit, but it just didn't financially make sense for us at the time. And I think that's something to consider again as you go forward now. Even with a ready node, the install process, ready node or build your own is just significantly simpler than it has been in the past. So, and you can see it in the labs.
Thank you.
Excellent. Another question. Sorry to make you wait.
Yeah, hi. This is a multi-part question, of course. From a VMware, from a VM perspective, what is the current allocation to vSAN versus traditional fiber channel-based arrays, and how do you see that distribution changing over the next 3 years? And then the next question is, what applications, whether from a technical or business perspective, do you see as last or never adopters?
Okay. Who wants to start?
Oh, he knows my infrastructure. He works with me.
Fair enough. Scott? So, what workloads are going on vSAN and what are not? And what percentage are on vSAN and what's not?
So I mean, we're just starting, right? So the biggest environments we have right now on vSAN would be the remote office and the VDI, which are starting with that. So we're okay with those workloads. Some of the things we're looking at is SQL servers, putting SQL servers on there. I think maybe Exchange might be one that might not end up there because I know Exchange had a lot of requirements. Like for instance, you can't put Exchange on NFS, so I'm not sure. We haven't looked into Exchange to see if they support vSAN or not.
We have a white paper. We have many 10,000 customers.
Does Microsoft support it? That's always So it's I think we're going to have to do that. I don't think we've excluded anything at this point, but we also, like every large enterprise, have 5,000 different applications. So as we come across something, we're going to have to look at it. So I can't really say that this is off the list right now.
So for our initial rollout, again, it was greenfield. We compared it to our existing SAN environment, and so we looked at it from a performance characteristic. We're seeing. I think what we're seeing is that the number of VMs we can support in that environment is based on the hardware, right? More so than it is. It's based on the hardware we purchased and put into that cluster, which is why we're moving away from the hybrid configuration that we have in dev test to an all-flash configuration in our production environment. And I think we're running SQL. We have a lot of software as a service, again, kind of based on our timing, so we don't have internal Exchange and SharePoint and things like that. But we have SQL Server that we run on there. And I think the last application, it's certainly not never, because I think, or that's certainly not our intention, but is our ERP application. And so right now we're running that in the dev test environment. And, again, under load, I think what we're seeing is just it's going to demand more IOPS, which again drives us to all flash. So.
In our case, we're still kind of in the getting started stages, so we've only got a few hundred VMs living on the vSAN infrastructure. But looking forward, I think we're going to try and put as much as we can on there. The one thing that we probably won't do anytime soon is SQL, and that's just because we just re-platformed it. So next time we'll look to put that on vSAN, I'm sure.
And I know he knows your environment, but the rest maybe not. So fair enough. Yeah.
So I think it's highly dependent on the workload that's going to be on it. Right now we're not putting anything that's clustered on the vSAN. But for us right now, I think if it's something that is critical or is something that just has to be up and has sensitive to latency in any way, we have a telecom application that is extremely sensitive to latency. So we qualify it in that respect. And if it's something that needs that type of dedicated resources, then we'll consider vSAN. Some of the technology that we have on it is VDI, which is mission critical. We're now moving a lot of our ERP. We run eBiz, so we put a lot of our app and CM into vSphere, and we'll most likely start putting it into vSAN just so that we can dedicate the resources to it. But for us, it's mostly, if it's critical, it's probably going to go on vSAN.
Okay. And speaking of critical workloads, we're storing data, but we got to protect it somehow. We need backup, recovery, disaster recovery. So I'll start with Michael, because I know that was your first use case. So talk a little bit about how you're doing disaster recovery and also backups.
Sure. So again, so we sort of grown over time in need for a secondary site. Along with adding the cluster, adding virtual SAN, we added SRM to our portfolio, started leveraging that with vSAN. So vSAN's the target. Over time, as we've added more workloads out there, we're replicating back now as well to the primary facility.
Yeah. And what are you using to replicate from your production? And your production site currently is on traditional storage.
Yeah. It's a mix. So we're using vSphere replication. Mixture of, timings in terms of replication for targets, and so we're seeing that that's working well for us. We're also leveraging EMC's Avamar product for our long-term data protection, and so again, I think we had some struggles early on with the product. Worked with the product team on that. And essentially the later revisions of the virtual SAN have sort of negated that issue. So we're happy running that, and I think we're very interested in the future of virtual SAN as it relates to data protection and the work the team is doing.
Okay. Yeah, we just we've had a couple of sessions this week on a new snapshot and portable snapshot technology called vSAN Data Protection. So could start introducing that eventually when it's available. So. Alex?
In our case, the Hadoop folks didn't have a requirement for backup, so we're not doing anything for them in that respect. But our traditional environment, we're using SRM with SRDF, so we'll be looking to employ some combination of like recover point for VM and maybe SRM for orchestration on top of it, something like that.
Okay. Joachim?
Yeah, so we're also using SRM in our traditional environment. So we've got SRM with vSphere replication. We use Commvault as our backup product, so we're using that also. So the one thing we're looking forward to is the snapshot features, because today in the traditional environment we do leverage the storage-based snapshots for the backup process, which does speed things up and make it a little easier for recovery. So we're looking forward to seeing that on vSAN. So that'll be a great addition.
Right.
So we use Commvault.
Commvault.
And typically, we have a dedicated team for that, but it normally gets backed up through Commvault. Okay. What we consider the data center 2.0, we'll have an SX, we'll have some sort of replication in respect of object-based, right? It'll be either SRM or Zerto.
Yeah. Okay, great. Another question?
So on the storage type, we got file block and object storage, the different types, right? Do you look into your SDS methodology or your processes you put in for SDS or different tools or products you pick for SDS, and evaluating applications, what kind of storage type would be the best, and then pick vSAN for like block storage type applications, and for example Hadoop, you pick up a product which has an object storage type like ECS. Do you consider the storage type for your SDS solution?
So I think I'm trying to maybe rephrase. So, vSAN doesn't support files. So if there's a file requirement, then, that you got to look elsewhere to place those kind of workloads. So now you're talking about, what about object versus block? How do you kind of decide where to place the rest of your workloads?
Right. Only from SDS point of view, not traditional storage point of view.
Okay. Anybody want to take a shot at that one?
So for us, we don't necessarily consider it that way. We probably don't have some of the applications that are kind of geared more one way or the other. And again, we try to come back from the perspective or the characteristic of the workload performance-wise and just ask, okay, well, what's the required performance characteristic for this application, and make sure that whatever storage we're putting that application on is going to meet that demand. And that's typically how we're going to look at performance of our new all-flash cluster in production comparative to our traditional SAN, which isn't necessarily apples to apples. But again, it's that sort of comparative of, are we getting the right performance from this application? In certain applications, to your point, just may not work well. But I think when we run into that, we'll engage the product teams and see what we can do.
Yeah, I think from our perspective also, we look at it more from a throughput IOPS kind of perspective more than what we're physically putting it on. So if we get the same amount of performance, we're happy with it.
Yeah, for us also, we're really, for the most part, moving virtualized workloads anyway, so they've already been put on VMware years ago. So as we're migrating them over to vSAN, we're not really even looking at that at this point. We do have a physical Hadoop cluster to take care of those workloads. And I guess down the road, we'll look at expanding what vSAN can do for us. But right, for files, we're using a traditional NAS server for that. So
we talked a little bit. Oh, we have another question here. Go for it.
Excuse me, I came late. Maybe someone already asked this question, but my question is: if you discover any unexpected limitation or issues when you implemented vSAN, so versa, and second question will be, if you go again, if you will make decision today, will you still pick vSAN versus traditional infrastructure? Or it's what kind of problem you have? And I ask him because I have to make a decision now. So go vSAN or go traditional infrastructure. So it's a lot of exciting features, but at the same time, it's very valuable. Thank you for sharing the information to hear from the first hands, what you will do if you will make a decision now. It's really vSAN can deliver what you're expecting. Okay. Thank you.
So we did a lot of work with vSAN in the beta and in the 5.5 version. We didn't deploy that into production because of what we saw in those versions as far as getting the hardware and getting some other features we needed. Once 6.0 came out with vSAN 6.2, we went ahead in our remote office environment, started deploying that. We still waited, though, in the enterprise data centers, and now with 6.5, that's what we're using for VDI and for the new follow-on to the infrastructure there. We really haven't seen any, at least in our environment, anything that says, oh, we better stop now and go do something else. For the most part, it really meets all of our requirements, so it really has worked out very well. Again, we didn't do it day one, right? We tested it, and it's really the third year of the product. So it's come a long way since the initial release.
Cool. So we did have problems because we were early, just like we referenced. We ran into, and I think what we did is essentially provide feedback back to support, so the account teams, the product teams, to tell them, okay, this is what we're seeing. Can you help us identify what's going on? This is a great forum, not just to hear from people that maybe have deployed it, but to get access to experts and engineers that are here at the meeting and get their feedback as to what they're seeing. They're very transparent about what's working well and what's not. So we got answers. You don't always like the answer you get, but we got answers. And I think for us, we certainly would do it again because we believe in the direction of the product. We believe essentially that where it will be is where we want to be. So for us, we'd certainly do it again, and we would do just like the rest of the people up here have references. We would be cautious and basically evaluate what risk you can take on in your environment and what you feel comfortable with. And again, once you have it in your environment, you feel more comfortable, you'll move further. So.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I think the biggest gotcha was a self-inflicted wound on my part, where I was moving a couple hosts out of one VC into another, and I didn't follow any rules whatsoever, and I ended up kind of blowing up the disk groups. So it was my fault for not following best practices or anything. So that was kind of the biggest issue in my respect. But I think we're still going down the journey since we're early, but this is the direction that we're going, so we're happy with everything.
For me, I think you'd have to qualify the workload that's going to go on it. You know, not everything, at least at this moment, I feel that not everything may be a good fit for vSAN. You know, we have our ERP database. Each LUN, I think it's like 278 gigs, but we have like 150 LUNs to it, right? So it may not be a good fit right now for us, considering how much IOPS it has. Like one server alone is like well over 21,000 IOPS, right? So you can probably get a better option using something else, right? So I think it would depend. You'd have to qualify your workload, I think. So, and you know, clustering, right? If you're going to cluster, that's another challenge.
And I'll just add to the conversation. So we have our support organization. We do metrics on the calls that we receive from all our customers. And by far the biggest challenge we had early on in the vSAN days was I/O controllers. Right? So these, you know, hardware behaves differently, different vendors behave differently. So getting the right mix of the firmware and the driver for the I/O controller was a huge challenge. And so in the 6.5 release, we come out with a auto update of that driver. And then in the latest release, we've rolled that into VUM. So vSphere Update Manager actually will load that driver up for you. So that was kind of one big one that, you know, a lot of customers faced. So we kind of hit that challenge. The second one, you know, who's ever called in for support and support says, okay, send me your logs. So now you have to go away, dump the logs, wait till vSAN, you know, upload them, wait till VMware receives them, right? So that's been a little bit of a challenge on troubleshooting vSAN. Is just, you know, we got to get the data to figure out what might be going on. And so the latest 6.6 release, we now have vSAN Cloud Analytics, basically call home. So, you know, if you're used to traditional storage arrays having a call home feature, that's what this feature is. It sends the data back to VMware. And then now we're building in tools so that when you call in to support will be able to actually pull up your environment and have a view of what you have, how many clusters, the status of the clusters, the performance metrics of those clusters. And so they won't necessarily have to ask you to, you know, dump the logs and send them to us. So we continue to improve as we go along based on some of those things. All right, we probably have one last question, and then we'll have to wrap up the session.
If I can jump in real quick, going back to qualifying hardware, if you guys haven't seen or used the Fling HCI bench, definitely go check it out. It's a great tool for running workload I/O on your stuff. So if you don't know about it, check it out, HCI bench from the Flings.
Yeah, I met the guy last night that wrote HCI bench, yeah. So he coded. So he put a lot of work into it. He uses Oracle VD bench and wraps around that and produces a workload on your environment to kind of stress test vSAN. So definitely a good one there. And we have a proof of concept guide as well. So if you kind of detailed to go through how to kind of put vSAN through its paces in order to make sure it's going to work for you, pulling drives and what the effect of that is, or, you know, how to insert errors and those kinds of things. So, all right, last question here, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, from a functional or services perspective, what's on your top enhancement for vSAN going forward? What's on your wish list for enhancements?
Well, I've got my own things, but yeah.
I guess one of the things we saw is that they're going to make it from a usability and maintenance point of view. They're going to add some features so that, blinking lights for replace this drive, things like that, that'll make it a lot easier for the people going into the actual data centers. So that, we have had it in the past where people have pulled out the wrong drives. So things, simple things like that actually mean a lot. But I mean, overall, I would say, I can't really think of anything at this point.
So for us, I think we continue to look at our data center and really want to consolidate down from our workloads. Like our current implementation, vSAN, that environment is 100% virtualized except for our network devices and our backup. And so when I look at that rack, that rack has 4 nodes that basically look like storage, right? Because they're running the virtual SAN environment. And there's a bunch of nodes below it that look kind of similar because they have a bunch of storage in them too, but all they're doing is hosting the backup data. And when you think about, that real estate, that space, that appliance, it's highly underutilized, right? And that's, to me, an opportunity. So I'd love to see some interesting things in terms of, leveraging maybe vSAN with different configurations to facilitate longer term retention of archival backup, things like that.
I think from my perspective, maybe capacity planning, alerting, and troubleshooting are some things that could use a little bolstering. And I know there's a lot of stuff coming with like integration with VROPS and whatnot. So I think those are going to have great synergies to help you get insight into the environment and help you both manage capacity and troubleshoot going forward.
Exporting NFS or iSCSI?
Okay. Yeah, so we've got the iSCSI, but we need to enhance iSCSI, and then NFS or SMB. We've received that feedback from customers in the past, and we take our customer feedback seriously. So we'll see about that one. And then just my biggest one, my wish list was extra protection for stretched clusters. And so we just delivered that in the latest release, so I'm pretty excited about that one. We finally delivered that. So with stretched clusters, we were doing copy of data to each site, but it was RAID 0 protected on each site. So with the latest release, we now have a copy of each site, and we get RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 6 protection in each site. So if you're looking to deploy that high availability, you get that extra level of protection. All right. Well, I want to thank the audience for, first off, being here. After maybe a late night last night. Thank you for the questions, and especially thank you to my panel. So hopefully a round of applause for the panel and for them for being here today.